Thank you. So yeah, hello everybody. I'm gonna talk about beyond isolation. So this is very preliminary work. It's first results, and I'd love to get your feedback. Unfortunately, Bakari, who did most of the technical work, was not able to join because his visa was only issued on Monday. So I hope he's listening online and is happy with my presentation. Yeah, and I just want to start with the mission of WWF Journey and WWF in general. So, yeah, really shaping a future for people, nature, and wildlife is kind of like the core of our work. And unfortunately, the loss of connectivity due to habitat fragmentation poses a serious risk to most of wildlife populations. And connectivity is really important for that. And as you know, WWF with a panda kind of wildlife is kind of in the core DNA of us. So it's not surprisingly that in our strategies that have been refined in the past years, in the outcomes and outputs of biodiversity, we have a target regarding improving wildlife connectivity. And this is basically where I was drawn in because we wanted to go beyond hectares managed for connectivity, species presence. We wanted to have some kind of spatial indicator. And this is basically what we are trying here. Just quickly, what I mean when I talk about ecological connectivity, it's basically the unrestricted movement, either of species for feeding, breeding, but also the genetic flow. So kind of any kind of natural processes that sustain our life on Earth. And then a wildlife corridor is really like a governed, managed unit, a geographic unit where there's activities to maintain or restore this effective ecological connectivity. So yeah, connectivity is kind of one of the most important factors, especially if we have large roaming species. And the idea now that I want to present to you is, yeah, our work developing a simple but also scalable, globally scalable, communication-friendly indicator to monitor on a strategic level. And we do this using human modification, so human pressure data. And I tell you our work in more detail later, but just to quickly mention, there's lots of great metrics on a species level, so using habitat suitability, but they are really resource intense, so they can't be really updated on a regular basis for a global portfolio. And they're also quite hard to standardize and compare between different landscapes. And then on the other side, there's more global indicators like PI or ProNet, ProCon, maybe you've heard of them, but they look at the landscape in a whole and how protected areas are connected. And they are two cores to really look into more details like the impact of interventions. So we need some kind of middle ground. And yeah, we did a test run in Unganisha. It's southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. Just here, a map of the area. It's a transboundary priority landscape of WWF. And it's huge. It's, yeah, bigger than Austria and Switzerland together, and really significant. Like we have globally significant populations of elephants, rhinos, lions, also wildebeest. Maybe you've seen images of or experienced live the big migration of 1.5 million wildebeest roaming in the circular route, 500 kilometers across this landscape. We also have more than 3 million visitors each year, and this is all threatened, for example, in Kenya, mainly by fencing, but also irrigation, a lack of land use planning in a lot of this area, increase in human-wildlife conflict, and on top of it comes also the climate heating. Now, the reason we choose this landscape is extensive species-specific connectivity work that was just finished and launched on Monday. So if you go on my LinkedIn, I put a link to the report. Basically, Bakari and colleagues did this looking at the connectivity of 7 focal species of the area, really using ecological data, also digitizing fences, having linear features going into the models. They use different kinds of models. So now we have this really data planned for conservation planning and monitoring, up-to-date data looking at this transboundary landscape. And the idea was to use this very species-specific data and then compare it with our more generalized indicator using just human modification. So there we don't use any species-specific data, and we can compare it and then actually see, does it reflect the connectivity patterns of these species. So basically what we did, you can see this on the map, we have 22 protected areas in the landscape. They're connected by 24 already defined conservation corridors, and we used 2 global data sets. Maybe you used them before as well: human footprint and human modification. And then we looked at these data sets in 3 different time steps. Just briefly, I don't really have time to get into detail, just to that you've seen it once. There's different methods to look at connectivity. So you can find like the easiest route to get from, for example, one protected area to the other. Or you can use, which I think more sophisticated methods, where basically it's the whole landscape is seen as an electric network. So you have 2 nodes, in our case, 2 protected areas. And then this model really looks at the current flow about all the possible paths to get from A to B within the movement distance that you defined. And then one of the metrics you get out of that is effective resistance. So it basically looks at the cost of animals to take all these paths into consideration to move from one protected area to the other. And that's basically the method we use. Here, just quickly, some more information on the 2 data sets. So the human footprint is a little bit coarse, has less input data. So it had built up areas, roads, population density, nighttime lights, and some agricultural data. And it's with 1 kilometer resolution. And then we took the more detailed human modification data set with 300 meters spatial resolution. And basically here, the idea was, how much detail would we need if we do see a positive correlation? And just, I don't know if it comes out clearly, but yeah, human modification takes quite a lot of data set going into it. And from the authors, we also got the positive feedback that it could be updated regularly. So here's our workflow. So we took these 2 data sets from the 3 time periods. And so basically, instead of using habitat suitability, movement suitability for species, we just said, okay, when there's high human impact, this is high resistance to move from one protected area to the other. So we gave it a score of 100. Then we also did the differentiation looking at the whole landscape. So we have 2 protected areas, and we didn't restrict where the model would find the paths of movement. And then in the second data set, we masked it to these corridors, which I just showed you on the map. So we kind of restricted the model to this mask. And then we got the effective resistance as a metric, which is basically the cost to move from one protected area to another. And this basically allowed us to do the temporal analysis, how these corridors changed, but also looking at the landscape. And yeah, what worked remarkably well, I didn't actually expect it that well, is when we look at like rank-based correlation analysis. You see it down the bottom. For a lot of animals, we actually got very similar connectivity, effective resistance values compared the human modification to the species-specific analysis. Only wildebeest and zebra, they're still positive but moderate. It's probably due to that fences play an extremely important role, and that is not included in the human modification data set. And then Bakari also classified the values for better comparison, and for a lot of the corridors here, all marked in green, we also have the same resistance class. And kind of his key findings he put together is that human modification definitely outperformed this correlation. Unfortunately, we see a decline in nearly all corridors. The human impact has been increasing between 2020, and so his suggestion is to focus on areas where we have a rapid change, to focus our interventions there, and have this combination of indicators. So one side looking at the corridors where we actually focus our connectivity work, but then also have a look at the broader landscape, what's happening there. And the current idea is for then as a strategy indicator, for example, it could be summarized at the delta change, because this would allow to make the values more comparable, and they also could be summarized on a landscape, on a portfolio. And then here's just a quick example. So it could be communicated if the resistance decreases, movement can increase. So we overall the connectivity improved. To quickly wrap up, so this was done for one landscape. Now a lot of things have evolved in the WWF network, which is 100 countries, so we are quite big. We will have a workshop in September with renowned connectivity scientists also to see how to move further. And actually our idea was first to test it on more landscape, but we wait until this workshop, maybe also your feedback, how we move forward, that we then have like an indicator that's relevant for the network roadmap, but also for our WWF Germany strategy. Yeah, here just our references, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback, maybe in the fields of area you work in. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga, for this presentation. Questions later. We're going to move on to the next presentation by Ollier, Andrianambinina, from MNP, Madagascar National Parks. I'm very, very happy that we have two conservation organizations here, one from Germany, one from Madagascar itself. The talk will be on spatial data for conservation, linking research and operation management in Madagascar. So MNP is the kind of agency that manages many parks in Madagascar, 49 protected areas with around 3 million hectares, so quite significant area. And Ollier is also an ambassador of GIS data within Madagascar National Parks. So very happy to have you present the work of MNP. Thank you.
Thank you, Melvin. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ollier Charl-Thom Andrianambinina. I work at Madagascar National Parks in the Department of Information Systems and Innovation. Today, I will show you how we use spatial data to connect research and field work. Let us start with the context Madagascar. Madagascar is one of the top 5 biodiversity hotspots in the world. More than 90% of our species exists nowhere else. But, our forests face strong deforestation pressure. This is why spatial data is essential for our work. We need to know where the pressure is, how fast it is changing, and where field teams should act first. Now, I will present you Madagascar National Parks. Madagascar National Parks manages 49 protected areas. Together, they cover 3.2 million hectares. This protected area include humid forest, dry forest, spinificate, coastal, and marine ecosystem. We work inside the park, but also in the buffer zone with local communities. Conservation only works when it works for people too. We face 2 big challenges: fire and deforestation. With satellite alerts now calibrated for our forest. The second problem, research results don't not reach the field or timidly. Our study will show that the buffer zone of protected area receives 10 times more deforestation pressure than the inside. We need precise tools and integrated information. To address these problems with our partner WRI and other researchers, one of our contributions is a calibrated forest map. One single threshold of tree cover density, global forest watch data, doesn't work for all Madagascar. We calibrated per ecological zone, especially by protected areas and their buffer zones. The result, mapping error dropped from 60% to less than 2%. Our second contribution is the correction of protected area boundary in the global database. Boundaries were sometimes wrong by several kilometers. Together with IRT, l'Institut de Recherche et de Développement, the Ministry of Environment of Madagascar, of course, and parks managers, we corrected all the boundaries of the protected area of Madagascar in these databases and submitted them to UNEP WCMC. The next step for us, Madagascar National Parks, is physical demarcation on the ground. Now, I will show you our platform, Synergy MNP. This platform is the fire and deforestation alert monitoring of Madagascar National Parks and use the two research results from area. One on the left, it's not changes. I have another presentation, but no one. Synergy MNP use free-level surveillance. We detected the signal with fire alert, satellite fire alert, and global forest watch deforestation alert. When the team received the alert, we are going to check on the field. After the intervention, you have the response. It's changed. So, community are our essential partners. They participate in patrol as eco-guards. They build fire breaks, where our fire risk maps show the highest danger. Using the deforestation map, they carry out community restoration and reforestation with the support of managers. Our next step is prediction with the support of KfW, Conservation ALS, and other partners. We are training an A model on historical fire and deforestation data. The goal, give rangers 7 to 14 days of advance warning. The field teams closest to the alert and in the at-risk area will be notified by Soleo notification if they don't have a standard network connection. We are moving from reaction to anticipation. Three things made this work. First, strong partnerships between research, government, or policymaker, and field operation. Second, scientific method, co-designed with rangers. And third, open source tools that anyone can use. The result and method are shared openly. But for the security of our ranger, the precise location of pressure and the ranger position stays confidential. That is what keeps the system effective. Thank you very much. Dr. Petaka.
We still have a bit of time. I think I also know a bit of presentation. There was a hiccup in the presentation there. Maybe you can talk more about Soleo and how you use Soleo actually. I think that's not really clear for many of us here.
Okay. Soleo is a satellite communication, the satellite communication. We have in Madagascar, we have a very big problem. Of the protected area, we don't have a network, classical standard network. And we need to notify our agent if our error, if an alert is in the zone. To move this problem, we adopt with some partner to buy Soleo, and we can notify directly our ranger in this area. We already begin to use this system, and we have a very good result.
Thank you very much. Also listening that how the open data contributes to immediate action actually in the field with these fire alerts. Now we have some time for questions. I'm gonna have 15 minutes, so feel free to ask questions now. Laurent?
Thank you for this excellent presentation. I have one question for each of you, please. So for Helga, we see that your model is very much geared towards large fauna, but the same connectivity issue could apply to other species with different challenges, like birds or insects, or even maybe flora. So how do you think your approach for large fauna, what would it require to translate it to other types of connectivity challenges for different species? And should I ask two questions or one after another?
I think one first, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. If you look at, I think it always makes sense looking into, the real world. Like I had this example of the fences, which do affect wildebeest and zebras. Think of the threats that threaten connectivity of whatever species or groups of species you're interested in. Define their threats that connectivity could threaten, and then the data sets or geodata you use, of course, has to reflect these threats in some way or another. So if I think of insects, definitely the global human modification with 300-meter resolution is probably not that suitable. And with birds, it's also different, especially if they're migrating. I just know from habitat suitability mapping, because they're not really on the ground, it's actually really difficult to predict connectivity for birds, like even in areas where you have high conservation work happening. So it really depends on which species you're looking at. Yeah. But in most of our landscape, the priority species we look at are these large mammals.
Yeah, do you want a second question?
I mean, if I can, maybe some others have other questions. So,
Okay, thanks. So first I wanted to make a comment. So for both of you, I think it's great work and great presentation. And one thing that from my side, where I work in KfW as a geospatial person, what I highly appreciate is that you give data back to the community. The Madagascar WDPA protected areas boundaries were my largest headache in this field in the last years because we do use the WDPA to monitor and report on our protected areas portfolio to the ministry, to the public everywhere, and even in planning stages we use it. And contributing that back is really extremely helpful and extremely valuable. So thank you, everyone who was involved, and say thanks to your colleagues. And also WWF, we use your open data sets. And I would be very pleased if you publish the connectivity data sets at some point. That would also be helpful for us. I have one question regarding the connectivity scenario. So basically, if I understand it well, what you guys are modeling is a potential pathway that the species could take based on, let's say, transportation routes and stuff like that. Do you also benchmark this against actual migration routes? Because you guys also have GPS tracks of elephants or satellite remote sensing products of elephant movements and stuff like that. So actually comparing your model performance to empirical data could be, I think, very, very interesting. And
Yeah,
do you plan?
It was done in the SOCNOT Atlas, which was published. And it actually, for example, had some recommendations, for example, to change the shape of some of these corridors, management units, because actually the models and the telemetry data showed that there's a difference. But for the human modification, we basically took the effective resistance values and compared them to the effective resistance values of the human modification modeling.
Okay.
Karen? Karen, can you step forward for the microphone? Because otherwise people can't hear you in the online room.
Great, thank you. Really interesting presentation on Madagascar. So my question is on trying to understand the mechanism. I'm an economist. So when you provide the information, the prediction model, so I guess two questions, like what goes into the predictions? I'm assuming this is things like, past planting date last year when they were burning or when the people went to the forest, but of course that can change over time. So kind of a first question there. But then my real question is, who does this information go to? Is that like the management of each of the parks? Is that kind of I can imagine different actors and different layers, and what makes them believe that those are the right predictions? Because they also have, some very imperfect information on the ground type of thing. And so how do you manage that?
Le micro, s'il te plaît, oui.
Bien sûr, oui. Donc c'est super intéressant. Et donc ma question c'est plutôt pour comprendre de quelle façon les prédictions du modèle. Premièrement, qu'est-ce qui va dedans? Donc quels sont les intrants pour être sûr que c'est des bonnes prédictions? Et deuxièmement, donc ça c'est la vraie question, de quelle façon qu'est-ce que vous faites pour que les acteurs qui doivent agir sur cette information ont de la confiance dans l'information, parce qu'ils ont aussi d'informations sur le terrain. Et du coup, ça ne sert à rien d'avoir une prédiction si les gens n'ont pas le moyen ni la confiance d'agir avec l'information.
Je vais répondre en français. Bon, je vais répondre en français. OK. Sorry, je vais répondre en français. Oui, en fait, notre système, en fait, c'est pas seulement basé sur les données satellitaires. Nous, Madagascar National Parks, on a une vingtaine d'années de données issues de terrain. Donc, en dehors des données satellitaires, on a aussi les données issues du terrain. pour la collecte de données, on utilise aussi un autre système qui n'est pas présenté là, Smart for Conservation. Et dans le Smart Conservation, on a les causes des pressions qu'il y a eu sur le terrain. Donc, pour répondre à votre question, le modèle n'utilise pas seulement les données issues des satellites, mais il utilise aussi les données issues de ce que les agents de parc ont dans notre base de données et aussi les données issues de ce que les communautés locales nous ont transmis. En fait, ça ne marchera pas si on utilise seulement les données externes. C'est pas possible. Il faut toujours des données pour valider ces informations.
So for the non-francophone speakers, sorry. So they do not rely only on remote sensing. They also use some field data that is either a verification data that the rangers do after fire alerts. They go on the field and they check if it was indeed a fire, and they try to characterize it. And also they rely on field information on pressure, partly from the rangers and partly from the communities. Yes. Yeah.
Great presentations, and thank you guys. I had a question on the kind of corridor and connectivity work you discussed. So it looks like you're assessing like the human pressure, right? I just didn't get a good sense of, you had a massive set of data. I'm wondering, is it simply kind of like population demographic? Are you trying to do like predictive change of agricultural incursion into these conservation areas as part of kind of the corridor mapping and the potential pressure, or not so much?
So basically, this data set exists. It's one indicator giving you an indication of how much human modification you have in each of these pixels, and going in are all these data sets that are showed. And basically what we are looking at, because for movement, and it's important, the spatial location of these pressures, because in some areas they might not hinder movement as much as they do in others. You can also use current flow as another metric you can use in connectivity analysis. It basically tells you where most of the movement is predicted from the landscape and location and spatial arrangement. And basically what we are looking at, this is also maybe another comment to Johannes' question, is if you have consistent corridors, geographic area shape, looking into the changing human modification within time. So we could do this analysis now in 2025 and compare it to 2020, like how did all the development happening in this region, how did it actually affected possible movement? And yeah, I was really questioning, can we use this human modification data to, predict correctly the species movement? And for most of the species that we're interested, at least in this landscape, it works really well. Yeah. But of course, the corridors would need to be consistent. So if something's changing with the corridor scape, which, telemetry data, species-specific data maybe will tell us, we need to correct the analysis. Yeah. So it's really for strategic monitoring that we get some idea what's happening in the landscapes, and can communicate about it.
Carl?
Yeah, thanks to you both for the presentations. I have a question for Ollier. So you said that one of the main problems was that the information systems were so fragmented. So can you maybe explain a little bit how all the solutions that you just presented interact with each other, and how you maybe use like the calibrated forest map to prioritize which fires to attend first or something yeah, that would be really interesting.
OK. Pour les différents outils et comment ça se rejoint quelque part, c'est un grand enjeu aussi, en fait. Il y a beaucoup de données, il y a beaucoup d'outils, il y a beaucoup de formats de données. Et tout ça, il faut que ça soit surtout euh, l'équipe de terrain arrive à se retrouver. Du coup, nous, c'est pour ça le principe de synergie MNP, en fait, avoir toutes ces données, avoir une base de données, un serveur qui formate il y a, je vais parler un peu informatique, il y a ce qu'on appelle APA. Les APA, tous ces outils, en fait, ils existent, des APA qu'on peut soustraire ces données. Et à partir de ces APA, il y a le format, une base de référence, comme on dit, qui transfère, qui change toutes ces données en un format unique que le système peut lire après. Donc, en dehors des collectes, il faut que l'outil soit libre, mais beaucoup d'outils ne sont pas libres aussi, hein. Et dès qu'ils sont traités, ils rentrent dans les pieds et après, ils sortent en un seul format qui sera transmis directement aux équipes de terrain.
Yeah, so they do have different tools and formats and actors using them. So it's always a challenge. And what they do is that they have this synergy MNP, which is some kind of a server, and all the tools must have an API where they can transfer the data to this server, and this server is open source because not all the tools are open source, and it kind of converts and harmonizes the data so that the users can access it.
Okay, thank you very much to both of you. And we're going to switch to another session, to the other two presentations. Michelle? So the first presentation of the second slot will be on how to integrate different geospatial models and field-based evidence, so data you get from the field, for conservation planning, with a special use case in the coastal area of Haiti. And the work will be presented by Michelle Latham. And Michelle is a technical specialist at IFAD. And I hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. And thanks again to the team for putting this presentation on the last minute. My colleague, Mariaude, could not be here. She had an injury, unfortunately, and came in yesterday to present on her behalf. So I work at the International Fund for Agriculture and Development. Just a raise of hands if you've heard of IFAD. Everybody? No? Yeah. IFAD is a specialized agency of the United Nations, an IFI, focused on rural development, eradicating poverty and hunger with smallholder producers. So I work in the environment, climate, gender team. I have a background in environment and climate, but also advising on geospatial data and analysis. So today I'll be talking to you about a project in Haiti that we're looking at. And in essence, it's a workflow for integrating geospatial modeling, field-based field evidence and stakeholder knowledge into climate responsive conservation planning in coastal Haiti. I think this is showing the old project. Yeah, we can't use the, okay. Yeah. Thank you. I'll go into the project. I think it's showing the old PowerPoint, so we'll see. So the project we're looking at, which is in gray on the map, is called the Inclusive Blue Economy Project, IB-BE.
Its goal is to reduce poverty and strengthen climate resilience of rural coastal communities while promoting conservation of coastal communities. As benefits 40,000 people, both 50% women and 40% of those are youth. Now, the blue area with the blue stripes is the AP3B area. So this is the largest marine conservation area in Haiti. It's approximately 45. No, sorry, let me just have them back. It's approximately 75,000 hectares. And it's an opportunity to reconnect zoning conservation priorities, climate adaptation, and project investments. So some of the key emerging risks in this marine coastals area is that there's severe coastal flooding and sea level rise. There's severe watershed degradation, social pressures, and institutional tensions. So the planning challenge is how can the AP3B combine geospatial evidence, field validation, and stakeholder knowledge to update zoning, rules, investments, and monitoring in a way that is climate responsive and locally feasible. So there is what I'm showing is the older presentation, so I'm going to try and wing it. It's okay? No. So a starting point is that the IBE has already georeferenced many project activity sites, including beneficiary locations, the areas of mangroves, ravines, agriculture investment sites. So this is a very good place to start. The next step is to connect these project layers with climate ecosystems and risk evidence so that they can support not only reporting, but better targeting, monitoring, and adaptive management. So just to highlight that whilst we have a lot of data already collected to show where IBE is working, we can expand on evidence-based models and open data sets to help explain the wider environmental and climate land use context around those investments. So we plan on using for ecosystem conditions and trends, land metric tool, the Capio, which is a new IFAD tool on using open source data, and as well as Google Earth Engine. For examining natural capitals and climate scenarios, we have going to examine the ABC map and scenario tools. And as for climate and hazard layers, we'll be looking at coastal flooding, drought, erosion, hurricane exposure, and sea level rise, all of which inflict parts of Haiti. This is be useful in the discussion framework to get your feedback on any other key analysis and data sets that you find would be pertinent. So these data sets should be treated as a hypothesis, not a final answer, so they can identify where to look, what to validate, and which planning questions to ask locally. So hard to go between the slides, so but it's okay. I'm trying. So what is missing that's really important is local knowledge, the local knowledge on the ground. So maps and models can show environmental patterns, but they often miss local dynamics that determine whether a management decision is realistic, fair, or effective. So for this, there's cross-border hydrology. Some rivers, for example, originate in the Dominican Republic. Flow regulation can create scarcity when water is blocked and flooding can overflow is released. There's also a local knowledge that's missing on border trade and industrial growth. Industrial zones, for example, and trade corridors attract workers, settlers, and new land use pressures may not appear in the older maps. Significant local pressures on displacement and dynamics because of populations, and as well as its impact on resources. Let's see. So we are looking at taking these data to develop 4 pilot analyses. The first is update the local land use and ecosystem change. So why this matters? The existing AP3B baseline is valuable but old. So we're looking for new data. So comparing it with more recent data sets can reveal where mangroves, dry forest, agriculture, wetlands, or settlements have shifted, and where field verification is essential. The second pilot analysis that we'll be looking at is on climate exposure and natural-based solutions. So we'll be looking, the core question we'll be looking at is where do ecosystems reduce risk, and where are interventions themselves exposed? So we look at combining multidimensional on coastal inundations, sea level rise, erosion, and sediment flow, restoration sites, and settlement exposure. And so the decision is whether to avoid maladaptation and identify mangrove rolling zones and prioritize NBS and improve emergency sensitive planning. The third pilot analysis is to examine watershed coastal connectivity. So this is some of the work that our colleague Stanley Pauline, he's online, but he cannot present, so we can also redirect any questions to him, is to protected area boundaries do not contain the pressures, sediment, water flows, pollution, and land use change often originate upstream or across borders. So in the AP3B, local teams flagged that some rivers originate in Dominican Republic, so I highlighted this before, and can be blocked, creating both water scarcity and overflowing flooding risks. So this will have an effect on planning implications, complement AP3B zoning with basin scale priorities and local water flow nodes. And finally, the final pilot analysis will aim to look at monitoring the project interventions and impact pathways. So it should help verify whether investments reduce pressures and strengthen ecosystem functions. So we'll be looking at mangroves, specifically ravines, livelihoods, and governments. And a common geospatial registry can connect project delivery and environmental compliance, adaptive management, and exit strategy. So you see on the map here that some of the work that Stanley has done is mapping of the mangroves, but we need a effective way to properly monitor the project interventions and impact pathways. So I have to go, let me see. So the aim is not to produce more maps, but better planning, conservation, and decisions. Is that it? Okay. But planning, conservation, and decisions. So we'll be looking from, the questions are where, what, how, and purpose, not so what. So this would involve the zoning. We'll also be looking to update conservation, restoration, sustainable land use, and buffer zones and risk. Well, what define activity zone rules? So fishing gear, mangroves, access, waste, irrigation. Looking at investment sites, so we're prioritizing restoration, MBS, livelihood alternatives, and infrastructure. And for the monitoring, track compliance, survival rates, complaints, and social tensions. So we have in place a work plan and feedback. So we're at the moment from May to June doing an inventory and harmonizing the data sets to create a shared repository and data catalog. We look forward to feedback from this session and also from other colleagues in the field in the Haiti project team. We, in July, will be looking at a pilot analysis, and later we have the midterm review to integrate the AP3B plan with zoning inputs and sector plans and a monitoring dashboard. So thank you very much for your time. And I winged it a little bit because I came in last night and I was on a trip, but I appreciate your patience, and happy to answer any questions or take your name so we can answer online.
Thank you also for the flexibility. Our next session will be hosted by Tommy, Charl-Thom from Land Portal, who will showcase us a dashboard prototype to analyze financial flows using the IATI data. So really looking forward to this one. Tommy is a program leader and land information specialist at Data Portal.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the session, and also thank you to the organizers for squeezing me into this session. My presentation is probably going to hit a slightly different tenor than the presentations that you are used to, but I hope that you still find it useful. I'm going to use that one as well. I'm going to look at linking development data to impact and what the opportunities there are for open digital tools to sort of map land investments. This is work that we kind of started on its own train, working on IATI data, and then a couple of months ago we became aware of the location data work that Maya them are doing, and saw some synergies here. So there are some elements in my presentation that are sort of wishful thinking rather than actual implementation yet, but we hope that it still makes sense. No, it's okay. I think I have the same problem as you. I'm looking at a slightly different presentation than the one that is up there on the drive. I don't know how that happened.
I winged.
But nevertheless, I want to just acknowledge some of my colleagues, Adam Sanchez, Romy Sato, and Luis Baquero, who are not here, who are also working on this project. So the question really, I guess, for us was when we started thinking about the problem is how do we take financial information from IATI, visualize it to understand who is funding what, where are they funding it, and how can that can be useful for impact evaluations or impact assessments. And some of these problems that we looked at are problems that are, of course, not, I think, new to people in this room. So there's a lot of data, it exists, but it's fragmented, it's not interoperable, it's a little bit in its own canon. And then the question is, how can we then improve this limited visibility and make sense of where land investments occur? Who is making those land investments? And how can that contribute to people like you that are doing impact assessments to link up the financial information with the information that you have on the more sort of technical side of your work, but also to understand how much is being invested in those outcomes. And even though it is still difficult necessarily to link sort of like, the commitment of financial resources to the outcomes, because there's so many factors that play a role, but I think it's all a part of a process of more progressive decision-making and more informed decision-making. And we're also all working in an environment where resources are increasingly scarce. So how do we get the maximum bang for our buck in these situations? And so we started trying to document our open workflows to make sure that we enable reuse of the data, of our workflows, the scripts, the code as well. And in that process to extract the IATI data. And we are focused on the land governance sector. IATI covers a lot of other areas that we are not necessarily interested in and that our audience is not interested in. So we have narrowed it down to the land governance sort of related projects. And we use LandVoc, which is a sub-schema of AgroVoc, which is also hosted by the FAO. And in that, there are 32 terms that have been selected to filter the data for, 2 of which include conservation terms. So, and maybe the conservationists here will disagree about that, but it's land conservation and forest conservation. So those are the terms that come out of the ontology and the sort of the data that is filtered here as far as it relates to conservation. But the key question that we seek to answer is, who is funding it. And by that we mean, who is the reporting organization in IATI, who is the funding organization as recorded in IATI, and who is the implementing organization as recorded in IATI. And then the what relates to the project, the description, the title, where is this taking place, at which country level. We know from the presentation yesterday that there can be a lot more detailed country level data. So if it's hospitals, are those point coordinates workings or added to the database? So we're certainly looking very closely at that to see how we can also integrate that, because ultimately we also want to make this data sort of spatially relevant and for use in a GIS. And then finally, how much money? And of course, when you start talking about how much money and you're looking at projects that go back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you need to start having processes for conversion of currency conversion and adjusting for inflation. So it suddenly becomes a slightly more complex exercise than one might initially think. It's also important that I point out that the dashboard itself is not a geospatial tool, but we are enabling the data then to be exported as a spatial layer after we have done some sort of visualization, filtering, and analysis. And then that can ideally be then used in a GIS for people that are actually doing the impact evaluations. I also changed this graph because it was so busy, but we go through a number of steps, and I'm just going to look at the big ones up there. We are harvesting the data. We have to split the XML. We do the currency conversions. We adjust for inflation. We create the RDFs because we have also got a lot of other data sources in our platform. And the idea is also to link the IATI data and the analysis that comes out of that with bibliographic data that we have on that particular geography that relates to land governance or webinars or other sources of information that may be of interest to those users. We export this to the dashboard, and then you can export your final results as a CSV or as a GeoJSON. So what does the dashboard actually do or look like? We do some limited spatial sort of visualizations, but really the dashboard asks you to look at who is funding it, where are they funding it, and how much is being funded. So there's some opportunities to create some sort of bar graphs. In the image on the right-hand side, you can see you can select countries or deselect countries if you maybe want to compare funding flows within specific countries in the region or discrete countries just because your organization may have projects in those countries. The origin of this work started with the Global Donor Working Group on Land. And so they had like a funding database, and we've taken over that work and trying to advance that further. So we also think this could be useful for funding organizations who just want to know at the highest level who is funding what kind of work in which countries, if you're interested in trying to sort of complement existing sources of funding. And then we provide some sort of summary statistics. The idea is that this can be connected to spatial services so that the filtered data, country, year, donor, is exported as a spatial layer that can have this financial information as attributes of that spatial layer that can then be incorporated with other analysis. And so that the people in this room who are much better at this stuff than I am can really understand or increase the understanding of the role that the money plays in driving outcomes, or where you are perhaps spending money less effectively or more effectively. At the moment, we only have national level boundaries. Once again, looking at them, we hope that we will be able to actually include subnational boundaries, administrative districts, or even specific point or polygon features that may relate to aspects of the project. The data is ideally then going to be imported in your QGIS. So we are an open data platform, and we are digital public good as certified by the UNDPG Alliance. So all our work has to be sort of follow open data standards. So our code, the scripts will also be made available on GitHub. We work there. And so this could theoretically be applied to other sectors, health or HIV, and people could essentially recreate this if there were to be any interest in that. And so I just imported this file yesterday. So it's pretty meaningless at the moment. But the idea is to start making IATI data as an input into spatial data sets. I'm going to wrap up, and I just wanted to say we are refining the model. One of the things that we want to do is to add the sort of subnational point polygon data, but we're also interested in sort of building an ecosystem approach. I mean, we're not covering everything. We're interested in partner review and feedback, and then also maybe to strengthen the focus on conservation, but also on perhaps other thematic issues. So this is ongoing work. It's a prototype. It is available online, but you need a password for now because we're not allowing broader access to it until we are ready to launch the prototype. So I want to invite everybody that is interested to please get in touch with us, provide feedback, and engage with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommy. And I'm opening the floor for questions. Yeah, floor.
Yes, thank you.
The microphone.
Yes. Sorry, I have a question for Michel. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. I guess that Haiti must be a very challenging setting to work in right now, and also for aspects that are related to that. So natural hazards and so on have taken a great toll on Haiti. But I wonder more on the reception of this kind of approach that can be technical, spatial planning, long term, and so on, for people who are in such a situation right now. How do you find some audience there, or do people kind of dismiss this kind of approach because it's too technical and too ambitious when you are in the everyday survival and so on? So how do you handle that? Yeah, thank you.
So many thanks for your question. And unfortunately, my team can't be here, so I can't answer all the